Hello, beautiful soul. Welcome to your sleep story. I am Theresa Noye, your radical self-love coach. I work with high-achieving women who typically put themselves last to love themselves enough to put themselves first. You deserve to love, cherish, and honor yourself without guilt because your well-being matters. It gives me great joy to be the voice that guides you into a restful sleep tonight. You are so deeply loved. Your existence is the proof. Before we begin tonight's sleep story, let's start with a relaxation session. I'm going to count down from 10 to 1, and as I do, allow yourself to let go more and more. 10. Feel the support beneath you, the support of your bed, the floor, and the earth beneath. Imagine the warm sand of a beautiful beach, cradling you, holding you with the earth's gentle strength. Allow that certainty, that solidity, to enable you to release a little more, to sink into this moment a bit more. 9. You are safe. All is well. Allow my voice to be a point of safety for you. Allow my voice to be an anchor that keeps you in a safe space. Know that my voice will only ever bring you into safe places. Feel it into your body now. Notice where you might be holding tension. Maybe your feet, your hands, your face, or your belly. Just release it all. Your body has worked hard for you today. It's time for it to rest. It deserves rest. 8. Today is done. Whatever has been, has been. Whatever will be, will be. All you have is now. So thoughts about the day that just was, or days that are to come, don't serve you right now. Allow that realization to enable you to settle into this moment more. 7. This is your moment. You have nowhere to be, nowhere to go. The only place you need to be is here, enjoying this cozy sleep story and the sound of my voice. You deserve it. 6. You deserve it. You deserve rest. You deserve sleep. You deserve to be here. Allow that fact to help you let go a little more. 5. Perhaps allow yourself to feel a little gratitude now. Gratitude for this moment. Gratitude for the ability to rest. Gratitude for the simple things. Your breath, the shelter you have tonight, the opportunity to switch off in a place of safety. 4. Embrace the coziness of this moment, the coziness of lying down in a safe space, moving towards sleep in the beautiful act of storytelling. 3. Begin to engage with your imagine now. Engage with your imagination. Picture a beach in the Caribbean, a secluded spot on the beautiful island of Barbados, isolated from the rest of the world, or another favorite spot that you may have. Allow yourself to engage. Bring that picture to mind and check in with your body again. Make sure you're not holding tension anywhere. Release and allow yourself to sink a little deeper to completely let go now as I tell you tonight's sleep story. The Meadow of Forgotten Dreams, Chapter 1, The Gate to the Meadow. It began with a gentle pull, a tug so soft it could have been mistaken for a passing thought. She followed it without hurry, letting her steps find their own rhythm, the way a river finds the bend in its course. The air was warm with the fragrance of late afternoon, sun-warmed grass, honey drifting from unseen hives, and something almost like vanilla that seemed to follow her from tree to tree. The path curved lazily, brushed in places with long blades of grass that reached out like old friends. She noticed how the sunlight slanted through the branches above, spilling over the ground in golden threads. The light didn't just fall, it lingered, as if reluctant to leave the places it touched. Ahead, a wooden gate appeared, weathered but not tired. Its hinges held no resistance, and when she placed her hand on the worn wood, it felt alive with quiet memory. Beyond the gate stretched a meadow so wide it seemed to inhale the horizon itself. Every stalk and bloom swayed gently, a slow breathing of the earth. She stepped through. It was the kind of place where time seemed to dissolve, where minutes and hours lost their edges. The meadow was not loud in its beauty. It was the kind that asked nothing, promised nothing, and yet offered everything simply by existing. The colors were soft but full, like watercolor painted on silk, yellows as tender as morning light, blues deep as the pause between two heartbeats, pinks that seemed to blush in the presence of the wind. She began to walk, her feet sinking slightly into the soil that felt warm and forgiving. Each step stirred the air, carrying to her the scent of petals and earth, a fragrance both new and somehow known. She could hear the sound of her own breathing mingling with the hum of bees, the occasional ripple of wings from a bird that passed overhead. In the center of the meadow, the flowers grew taller, wildflowers with delicate stems and crowns that nodded under the weight of their own abundance. She paused before one with petals the shade of faded lilac. The moment she leaned closer, she felt it, an almost imperceptible shimmer in the air, like heat above a summer road, and then a memory. It came not in words, but in feeling. The way she once sat at a small desk by an open window, writing by hand for no reason other than joy. The ink had flowed easily, her thoughts skipping ahead of her pen. She remembered the delight of it, the kind of happiness that hums quietly in the background of a day. She hadn't thought about that afternoon in years. The flower's petals seemed to curl inward slightly, as if satisfied its secret had been shared. She smiled, not with nostalgia, but with a kind of recognition. The dream she had once carried was not lost. It had simply been resting there, in this meadow, waiting for her to notice it again. She kept walking, letting the wildflowers whisper their soft revelations. Each one she touched offered something different, the echo of a song she used to hum while cooking, the image of a place she once longed to see, the sound of laughter on a summer night with people she no longer knew, but whose warmth still lived in her. Overhead, the sky was an endless sweep of blue, unbroken except for a slow drifting cloud shaped like a question mark. She noticed it, tilted her head, and wondered what it might be asking her. But she didn't feel the need to answer, not yet. Instead, she found a patch of grass that bowed gently under her weight and sat down. The earth was firm but kind, cradling her like an old friend. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, it was as if the entire meadow breathed in sync with her. The hum of bees, the rustle of petals, the quiet rhythm of her own heartbeat. Somewhere deep inside, something loosened, like the slow untying of a knot she had carried for years. She didn't yet know what she had come here for, but she knew she would stay, and that whatever was meant to be found would arrive in its own time, under the wide open sky of the Meadow of Forgotten Dreams. Chapter 2, Petals of Remembrance. She woke from a light doze without realizing she had fallen asleep. The sun had shifted slightly, its light now brushing the meadow in a softer hue, more gold than white, as though the day had exhaled into late afternoon. When she opened her eyes, the wildflowers seemed closer, as if they had leaned in to keep her company. The air was warm, but threaded through with a breeze that carried the faint sweetness of clover and something more elusive, like the scent of pages in a beloved book. She let her gaze wander. Each flower swayed at its own pace, yet together they formed a slow, unspoken rhythm. She reached for one nearby, a bloom of buttery yellow with a center the color of deep honey. The petals were smooth against her fingertips, and the moment she brushed them, a memory unfurled. She saw herself standing in a kitchen with light spilling across the floor. On the counter sat a mixing bowl, a dusting of flour, catching in the sunlight like tiny snowflakes. She had been making bread, hands deep in the dough, laughing at the sheer mess of it. It had been a day with no rush, no checklist, just the steady, simple pleasure of creating something with her hands. She realized, with a gentle start, that she hadn't made bread in years, not because she stopped loving it, but because life had become too full of other things, urgent things, necessary things. The memory left behind a warm ache, the kind that is both tender and alive. The flower stem bent slightly in the wind, as if nodding to her. She smiled back. Standing slowly, she wandered deeper into the meadow. Every few steps, she bent to greet another bloom. A soft blue flower offered her the memory of a rainy afternoon when she had read an entire book in one sitting, the rain tapping the windows in a rhythm that matched the turning of pages. A deep crimson blossom brought back the image of dancing in her living room alone. Music loud, joy unrestrained. She noticed something. None of these dreams were grand or elaborate. They were not the kind of ambitions she once wrote in journals or mapped into 5-year plans. They were small, almost hidden moments, and yet each felt whole, like a complete universe that had existed just for her. As she walked, she began to wonder how many such dreams she had unknowingly set down along the way. The meadow seemed to know them all, holding them patiently without judgment or urgency. In the distance, she spotted a flower unlike the others. Its petals shimmered faintly in the sunlight, not with any bright or showy display, but with a softness like moonlight caught in fabric. She felt drawn to it the same quiet way she had felt drawn to the meadow itself. The closer she came, the more the air seemed to still. Even the bees drifted further off, leaving a pocket of silence around the flower. She reached out, but hesitated just before touching it. For a moment, she simply looked, really looked, at the delicate way its petals curved inward, at the almost imperceptible quiver it made when the breeze touched it. When she finally let her fingers brush its edge, she felt something deeper than a memory. It was not a scene from the past, but a question, soft and persistent, forming in her mind. What would you dream if you knew you could not fail? She stood still, the question lingering in her chest like the echo of a bell. It didn't demand an answer. It simply settled there, warm and patient. She knew she would carry it with her for the rest of her walk, perhaps much longer than that. Chapter 3. The Whispering Wind. She kept walking, the question still glowing softly inside her. What would you dream if you knew you could not fail? The meadow seemed to widen as she moved forward, though there were no paths, no markers, only the gentle sway of flowers stretching as far as her eyes could see. The air shifted, carrying with it a sound that was not quite the rustle of leaves and not quite the sigh of wind. It was softer, rounder, almost like the low hum of a voice too distant to hear clearly. She slowed her pace, letting the sound find her. The wind moved through the meadow in long, slow currents, and each time it passed, the petals trembled and tilted toward her as though they were listening too. She tilted her head, closed her eyes, and realized it wasn't just sound, it was feeling. The air carried a sense of invitation, as if urging her to open something she had kept closed for far too long. She paused beside a cluster of pale pink blossoms. Without thinking, she reached down and cupped one gently in her hand. A memory surfaced, but this one felt different from the others. She saw herself standing in front of a blank canvas, paintbrush poised in her fingers, a rush of color waiting inside her to spill out. She remembered the flutter in her chest, not from fear, but from the delicious anticipation of beginning. She had started painting that day without a plan, simply letting the colors find their own way. The result had been imperfect but alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. The wind returned, curling around her like a silk ribbon, and she could almost swear she heard words in it. You can begin again. She opened her eyes and looked across the meadow. The flowers ahead seemed brighter now, not in hue, but in presence, as though the longer she stayed, the more they revealed themselves. She kept moving, touching blooms with fingertips light as breath. One recalled the sound of her own laughter echoing through an empty train station late at night. Another, the warmth of her writing a letter to a friend and sealing it with a kiss of wax. Each memory was a reminder. The dreams she had left here were not all tied to ambition or achievement. Some were simply invitations to feel more, to live more gently. Somewhere in her chest, a shift began. It was subtle at first, like a door easing open without a creak. The question from the shimmering flower returned, but now it felt paired with something else, another truth, almost like an answer. She realized she didn't have to dream in the way she once did, in skyscraper-sized visions that left no space for rest. She could dream in smaller shapes, in morning light across her table, in the sound of water pouring into a mug, in the feel of the wind combing through her hair. The breeze lifted again, stronger now, making the meadow ripple in waves. She turned slowly, letting her eyes sweep the horizon, and noticed a small rise in the distance. At its crest stood a lone tree, its branches spread wide as though it had been waiting for centuries to greet her. The thought came unbidden. Perhaps the answer is there. She didn't rush toward it. Instead, she began walking in the same slow rhythm the meadow seemed to keep. But with each step, her body softened, her shoulders lowered, and the air around her seemed to hum with a promise she couldn't yet name. The flowers along her way swayed as she passed, releasing faint threads of memory and possibility into the air. She breathed them in, and with each inhale she felt lighter, as if she too could sway without resistance, rooted yet free. The rise ahead glowed faintly in the warm light, and the tree's shadow stretched long and graceful across the grass. She didn't know what she would find there, only that she was ready to arrive. Chapter 4, Under the waiting tree. The rise was gentle, the kind of slope that invited lingering. She let her hand skim the tops of the flowers as she climbed, each petal cool and tender against her fingertips. The air grew stiller, the closer she came to the tree, as though the meadow itself held its breath. When she reached the crest, she paused. The tree stood in full, quiet dignity, its trunk wide, its bark patterned with lines like a story written over decades. The branches stretched outward and upward, an open-armed welcome. Its leaves caught the sunlight in flashes of green and gold, shifting in a slow, hypnotic dance. Beneath its shade, the grass grew thick and soft. She lowered herself onto it, sinking into the earth's gentle hold. The ground was cool, but not cold, more like the touch of a comforting hand on the back of her neck. For a while, she simply sat and watched the meadow below. From here, she could see how it moved as one body, waves of flowers swing in harmony when the wind passed through. She thought of how each blossom had its own roots, its own life, and yet they belonged to something larger, something that held them all. She leaned back against the tree and closed her eyes. The air was rich with scent here, sun-warmed wood, green leaves, the faint sweetness of blossom carried uphill. And then she felt it, a presence, gentle but certain, like the meadow had followed her here and settled in the space between her breaths. It spoke not in words, but in knowing. The dreams she had touched today, the laughter, the music, the painting, the bread, were not relics. They had not been lost in the way she feared. They had simply been waiting in this timeless place, kept safe until she was ready to remember them. She saw them clearly in her mind now, each dream like a glowing thread. Some were bright and alive, pulsing with the promise of new beginnings. Others were softer, like faded fabric, beautiful in their own right, but no longer meant to be worn. She understood that some dreams were not meant to be carried forward. They had done their work, and their gift was already within her. The tree seemed to approve of this knowing. A breeze moved through its branches, making the leaves murmur, a sound that felt like affirmation. She rested her palm against the bark and imagined it carrying her gratitude down through its roots. Her eyes drifted open to a small discovery, a scattering of petals around her, though no flowers grew so close. It was as if the meadow had sent them here, gifts from the dreams themselves. She picked up one pale blue petal and held it in her palm. It felt lighter than air, yet it grounded her in a way she couldn't explain. She realized then that she had a choice. She could take these dreams back with her, rekindle the ones that still lit her up, and release the others with a quiet blessing. The meadow had not only offered her memories, it had given her permission. The wind shifted again, this time moving toward the far side of the meadow. She followed its path with her eyes and saw in the distance a glimmer of water. The surface caught the sunlight in a way that made it seem to beckon her. She imagined it as a mirror, one that might show her how these dreams looked in the light of who she had become. She took one last deep breath under the tree, feeling its strength at her back, then rose to her feet. The petals in her hand fluttered once in the breeze, and she knew the meadow would guide her there. And so, with the slow ease of someone who has nothing to chase and nothing to prove, she began to walk toward the water. Chapter 5. The Water's Reflection. The walk toward the water was unhurried, each step folding seamlessly into the next. The meadow seemed to part for her, flowers leaning back just enough to brush her fingertips without holding her in place. The light had softened into the golden hour, where every shadow was long and gentle, and every color seemed to hum at a lower, more tender frequency. As she drew closer, she heard it first, a quiet tapping, as if the water were breathing in harmony with the meadow's slow rhythm. When she saw it, a small lake, round and still, cupped by a fringe of wild grass and flowering reeds. Its surface was glass, so smooth it seemed to hold the entire sky in its hands. She stepped to the edge and looked down. Her reflection gazed back, not the hurried version she had seen so often in bathroom mirrors, but something softer, unguarded. Her eyes looked clearer, as though a fine dust had been washed away. The curve of her mouth hinted at a smile, one that came from somewhere deep and unforced. And then she saw them, the dreams, not in any literal sense. There were no floating images, no scripted visions, but as colors drifting like ribbons beneath the water's surface. Each hue seemed to belong to a memory she touched in the meadow, the butter yellow of bread dough beneath her hands, the deep blue of a rainy day's solitude, the vivid crimson of dancing alone, the lilac of a page covered in ink. They moved slowly, never tangling, never fading. She noticed something else. Some of the ribbons shimmered brightly when her reflection met them, as if they recognized her. Others floated more distantly, their light softer, already drifting toward the edges of the lake. Kneeling, she cupped her hands and dipped them into the water. It was cool and silken, wrapping around her fingers like a promise. When she lifted them, droplets clung to her skin, catching the sunlight in tiny prisms. She let the water slip back through her fingers, watching it rejoin the surface without a trace. As she sat there, a calm certainty filled her. The bright, close dreams were the ones to bring with her, to nurture, to weave into her days again. The ones drifting away were not losses. They were gifts she had already unwrapped, their lessons folded into the fabric of who she was now. The breeze moved across the lake, and for the briefest moment, her reflection blurred into light. In that shimmer, she felt a quiet shift, as if the weight of years she hadn't even realized she was carrying had lifted from her shoulders. She closed her eyes and listened. The water's soft rhythm merged with the low hum of the meadow. Her breath matched their tempo without effort. When she opened her eyes again, she felt no need to rush, no urgency to gather the dreams in her hands. They would be there. They had always been there. The meadow was not a place she could lose, because it was a place she carried within her. As she turned back toward the meadow, she felt the petals she had been carrying shift in her grasp. They were lighter now, almost weightless, as though they knew their purpose had been fulfilled. The walk back would not be the same as the walk here. She would return not as someone searching, but as someone who had found. Though what she had found was less an answer and more a way of being. She looked once more at the water, its surface holding both the sky and her reflection in equal grace, and then began the gentle journey back through the meadow. Chapter 6. The Return. The way back felt different, though her feet traced no real path. The meadow received her as if it had been expecting her return. Flowers leaning toward her with the kind of welcome that doesn't ask where you've been or why. The petals she carried in her hand fluttered in the light breeze, but none slipped away. She held them gently, not as treasures to guard, but as companions for the walk, symbols of what she would now carry differently. The air was cooling, brushed with the faint scent of evening. Shadows lengthened over the grass, and the light turned a shade deeper, a kind of liquid gold that made every edge softer. She noticed the sound of her own steps, the quiet crunch of grass and soil beneath her, a sound she'd walked over all her life without ever truly hearing. Every so often, she would stop to touch a flower she'd passed earlier in the day. Each time it greeted her with the same open stillness, but she realized something had shifted, not in the meadow, but in her. She was no longer reaching to claim memories or to uncover something hidden. She was simply noticing, appreciating. The shimmering flower that had asked her the question was there, just as she had left it. She bent close again, wondering if it would speak to her a second time. But it didn't. It didn't need to. The question was still alive inside her, and now it felt less like a challenge and more like an invitation she could answer slowly in her own way. As she neared the wooden gate, the horizon behind it was painted in strokes of lavender and rose, the first stars just beginning to blink awake. She paused, taking in the meadow one last time, not with the urgency of someone trying to remember every detail, but with the calm of knowing she could return, in thought or in truth, whenever she wished. The meadow was not going anywhere. The dreams were not going anywhere, and neither was the part of her that could receive them. She stepped through the gate, its wood warm against her palm, and found herself back on the winding path. The air outside the meadow was the same, yet she felt wrapped in something softer, as though the very act of walking was a kind of prayer. When she reached into her hand to look at the petals, she found they had dissolved, gone without her noticing, as if the meadow had quietly taken them back. She smiled at this, sensing it was the meadow's way of telling her she didn't need to hold on to tokens to keep what she had found. The remembering was already woven into her. She turned once more toward where the meadow lay beyond the gate. The breeze rose, carrying with it a faint fragrance of wildflowers, even here. She breathed it in deeply, letting it settle in her chest, warm and steady. And then she continued walking, not towards something urgent, but into the open evening, each step a quiet promise that she would let her days hold more of the small shimmering moments, that she would dream without demanding, that she would notice the beauty in what was already hers. The path curved gently out of sight, but she didn't look ahead. She didn't need to. The peace she carried was enough.